Shall we? Economic growth in Nigeria accelerated faster than expected in the second quarter of 2022, surpassing analysts' estimation and predictions and projections. As increase in the country's latest GDP report was majorly driven by the growth in the non-oil sector. And according to the recently released NB National Gross Domestic Product for the second quarter of 2022, Nigeria's economy output expanded by 3.54% year-on-year, and they're falling by 1.47% below the 5.01% economic growth rate recorded in the Q1 2021 rather, due to the decline in the oil sector for two sectors consecutively. Leading the pack as the top best performing sector in the second quarter of 2022 is road transport, which grew by 56.38%, closely followed by coal mining as the second best performing sector, which grew by 36.06%, and then water supply, sewage and waste management sector. Now, air transport and quarrying and other minerals also forming part of the non-oil sector. Now, despite unabated microeconomic fundamentals, the Nigerian economy has so far shown signs of resilience in the face of rivalry and the war, of course, between Russia and Ukraine, which affected the global economy. To give us expert analysis on this development and the sectoral performance of this particular report, I'm now being joined live from our Abuja studios. The Director of Tax Advisory and Compliance at Price Waterhouse Coopers PwC, Mr. Ayo. He joins me live on the program. Thank you so much, Mr. Ayo, for agreeing to speak with us here on Business Nigeria. Perhaps we should begin with an overview and your analysis of this report, the GDP growth. It's indeed something worth celebrating, is it?
Yeah, good afternoon, and good afternoon, viewers. In my view, yeah, I think it was a relatively good, modest performance, better than where we were a couple of quarters back, where we had the recession. But in terms of the overall performance of the economy, I think it's just a modest one. If you look at this vis-a-vis the growth rate in population, which is probably about 3%, so we're just not marginal, from that point of view. And clearly, that is not enough to move the needle, considering the economic situation we are in Nigeria. So much more has to be done. Considering our capacity, the size of our economy and all that, we should be growing at minimal of 5%, and to make the kind of progress that we needed to make to address issues around unemployment and unlock the value that is latent in our economy. We should be growing at 10% at the least.
Mm. But I wonder perhaps just which sector stands out for you, this recorded growth. I wonder which sector stands out for you, just before we begin to look at the analysis.
Well, I think overall, I really don't see, it's quite surprising to me that it's the like of transport sector, the transportation sector, the refuse disposal sector. Though I'm not aware of any major reform agenda that's been put in place by government to drive reform in those sectors. So for me, if there are any significant improvements in those sectors, it seems as if they're just accidental. And I really don't see, if there's no structural strategy around how we're able to sustain this level of performance, then it's then difficult to say that those sectors stood out. Maybe telecoms, because of the telecommunication reforms in the GSM sector. I think the fixed line is likely dead. So maybe that's an area where we could say that to some extent we've made some level of progress. But outside that, if you look at transport, I think it's mainly driven by road transport sector, and that's an area where we have huge deficit, in terms of infrastructural deficit. I'm not sure we have any good road, one road that links the southern part of the country, probably from somewhere like Lagos to Maiduguri, or from Calabar to Sokoto, where you could drive on a good road all the way. So it seems to me like, clearly we still have a lot to do.
All right. So, well, Mr. Ayo, I mean, we have to look at some of these other sectors. Of course, we've just begun with road transport. There's also the coal mining sector. There's air transport, coal and other minerals as well. But perhaps, if you also look at just how this particular administration has taken up with the issue around the railway infrastructure and how it has become very expensive to fly, isn't that perhaps the reason why the road transport sector perhaps could have recorded the highest growth in many months?
Well, maybe you need to look at the performance of that sector vis-a-vis the kind of investment that has gone in there. We have spent money to develop rail between Abuja and Kaduna. We have spent money to develop rail between Lagos and Ibadan. And I think, those are just the two functioning rail that I'm aware of, okay, maybe between Warri and Itakpe and I'm aware, and I think this was something in the public domain when the Abuja-Kaduna rail was commissioned. It was likely built using borrowed funds. But for many months, you can't even book a ticket online. You have to physically go to the train station and buy your ticket. You can't even buy to and fro if you're traveling to Kaduna and coming back the same day. So clearly it shows that those assets are not being efficiently managed. So yeah, we might have seen some modest performance, but it just shows the kind of capacity and the opportunities in those sectors if we get our acts right. And that's why I said that it's basically like a sleeping giant, but there's much more that can be done. Because we have not addressed the issue of security effectively, now we have an asset that we've invested substantial amounts of money to build, and that asset has been fallow for a couple of months because we have some of our citizens that have been kidnapped, and we've not been able to, to rescue them. So if we're celebrating this level of performance, it just shows that maybe we really haven't looked at, overall, the kind of opportunities that are available and where we should be operating, as the giants of Africa.
Mm. Mr. Ayo, let's shift our focus to crude oil production in this second quarter, because we recorded an average daily oil production of 1.4 million barrels per day. This, of course, is lower than the production volume in the first quarter. Issues around operational challenges such as oil thefts and pipeline vandalism, of course, it appears took center stage. You wonder perhaps just how the Nigerian government can put an end to issues around oil theft and vandalism, because the country is losing so much in that regard.
Yeah, that's an area where I think there's low-hanging fruit there, and the performance has been really disappointing. I think probably in the last 9 quarters or so, consistently, that sector has been underperforming, and that's a sector I'm also quite familiar with. I was in that industry for about 20 years or thereabouts. So, and like many aspects of our lives in Nigeria, we see things gradually getting from bad to worse. In the 70s, Nigeria was conveniently producing over 2 million barrels per day. But today, we're barely producing 1 million. Maybe this quarter, the average production was about 1.4 million per barrels, which was even much more than what it was in Q4 2021. I think Q4 2021 we produced about 1.6. Last quarter I think we produced about 1.46 or thereabouts. And this quarter we only managed to produce 1.4 million barrels. And this is a country where we have the capacity to produce over 2 million barrels. So you can see the value that we're leaving on the table. In terms of, and the investments have been made. We have the capacity to make this production, but it's just rather surprising that we really haven't been able to resolve issues around security. Security, again, like we talked about, having a negative impact on the transport sector. So that has significant impact also on the petroleum sector. And I recalled recently the Chief of Naval Staff, providing some explanation as to maybe some discrepancy between the numbers that is reported as stolen, that maybe instead of it being stolen, they were shot in. But really, what's the difference? You have made investment in exploration, you've made investment in developing those assets. Now it's time for you to produce them, and you shot them in at a time when oil prices are above $100 per barrel. We're basically contriving, and it's as if a lot of forces are working together to grind the economy of Nigeria. And I believe this is an issue that should be addressed, comprehensively, by the government, because it's the responsibility of government to provide security, to ensure, properties and lives are secured. So the most important resource that we have, even though from a GDP standpoint, the contribution may be minimal, probably between 10 and 15%. But from a forex point of view, this is an industry that generates over 80% of the foreign currency for Nigeria. And I recall the CBN governor coming out to say that the challenges we're having from a forex point of view is probably because of the underperformance of the oil and gas industry. And we're just looking at upstream. Downstream, very recently, the NNPC Chief Executive Officer alluded to the fact that now, by 2023, the refineries will start working. But we've heard that before, and we sincerely hope that this time around, we're actually able to make it work. You could imagine the multiplier effect if we're able to tap into the whole of the value chain in the upstream, in the midstream, in the downstream sector of the economy, how that can readily transform and push Nigeria forward in the community of nations.
All right, Mr. Ayo, perhaps we should shift our focus away from the oil and gas sector and discuss another sector that is going through a lot of crisis. That has to do, of course, with the aviation sector. In very recent times, I mean, that it's a sector that has seen a lot of controversies, a lot of disputes here and there between airline operators and regulators. The passengers are lamenting and all of that. But ironically, the aviation sector grew by 22.45% in Q2 of 2022 from 50.68 growth recorded in the previous quarter, despite the issues confronting that sector. What do you think?
Yep. Well, I think maybe the good way to look at it is to say, what are we comparing with? We're comparing with a time when everywhere was grounded, there was COVID, and this time of 2021, that industry was barely recovering post-COVID. So we're comparing with a very low activity period, but generally, this is a kind of growth that the people cannot feel the impact. The cost of air travel is probably at its highest levels, likely because of also issues around petroleum products, geopolitical risk, the Ukraine-Russian war. But these are issues that ordinarily should not be affecting us in Nigeria. We're an oil-producing country, for God's sake. Just because we can't refine our crude oil. So that's why we're exposed to all this risk. And of course, the fact that There's insecurity practically everywhere. So even short distances, people then have to rely on flying. At least majority of the people, do that at the moment. So this is not the kind of growth, that we expect to see. We want growth that is driven by reforms. We want growth that is driven by increased business activities, translating to higher level of employment. Are we seeing higher level of employment in the aviation sector? Are we seeing more profitability of players in the aviation sector? Are we seeing more interconnectivity internally within the country? And, externally also within the West African sub-region, within Africa, and globally as a whole. Maybe we have a few additional routes, but clearly, considering the size of Nigeria, we should be doing far more than what we're doing. And what we're seeing just shows the kind of potential that is available, that we can deliver, even in the aviation sector, if we'll really take our rightful position.
All right, so I'm told that we have to wind down on our conversation now, but perhaps you could also respond to the coal mining sector, the growth in real terms that was recorded in that particular sector, and do an overview of what your projections are as we delve into another quarter and, of course, towards the end of 2022.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that you could see some improvement in the mining sector. It's just that the aspect of mining where we're seeing growth. Incidentally, coal is an area where the world is moving away from. So if that is an area where we're then growing in, it then shows, how in terms of our strategy, the direction in which we're going. Because of issues around climate change, because of issues around decarbonization and moving to cleaner energy sources. So the world is moving away from coal, and that happens to be an area where we're seeing growth. Other areas where we could have seen significant growth in the area of mining, in the aspect of bitumen, in the area of gold mining, and many other very important metals. In fact, I understand that there's barely any part of Nigeria where you don't have minerals that we could mine and then use as a basis to diversify our economy. So the positive side of it is, yes, it shows what can be done, but the challenging part is for us to roll up our sleeves, do the heavy lifting, and get the job done. The areas where we could easily have quick wins in mining, places like Zamfara State, are areas where insecurity is making it difficult for us to regulate and monitor what is happening in those areas, and for government to be able to tap into the entrepreneurial spirit of Nigerians in those areas, and fully optimize opportunities in that space. Yeah, in terms of what the future holds, I think the future clearly is bright. If only as citizens we get ourselves together, and put in our best, as those who are in position of leadership would come up with strategies, with policies that would drive the economic direction. Unfortunately, we didn't talk about agriculture. That's an area where there's a lot of opportunities. But really, what have we done in the area of agriculture other than just throwing money into that sector? I think the CBN has invested probably close to about 3-4 trillion in that sector. But that's still the sector that is driving inflation at the highest level in Nigeria as we speak, food inflation. And we all keep claiming that is because Russia and Ukraine are fighting. But we have huge, a very large country blessed with fertile land, and if we have now mobilized resources and we've invested significantly in that sector, 4 trillion is huge, it's massive. The question is, how well are these resources, being utilized for the purpose of growing what we need? I recall the acronym that we should grow what we eat and eat what we grow. But
All right.
if insecurity is not allowing us to grow anything, what else are we going to eat? Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Ayo, maybe in 20 seconds or less, because I know that you're very versatile in issues around taxes and all of that. Can you, in 20 seconds or less, just respond briefly to just how the Nigerian economy has been affected by a disturbing and rising debt profile, issues around inflation, and of course the fact that tax compliance is something that we seriously need to improve upon? In 20 seconds, please.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities. Yes, there's a lot of opportunities in terms of our tax collection. The rich are not paying, many of them are not paying taxes. Why? Because maybe they're not in paid employment. So we are focused more on profit taxes and less on transaction taxes, which is easier to administer. So I think we need to go back and do more in that area. The high net worth individuals, how much taxes are they paying? I think the political period is an interesting one, where a lot of the people that are able to buy 100 million form or 40 million, as the case may be, what taxes have they paid during the course of the year?
Well, we'll see how events unfold in the coming months and the next quarter. We hope that we can keep this growth coming. We hope that we can see a positive growth in our Nigerian economy as well. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us. Director of Tax Advisory and Compliance at the PricewaterhouseCoopers PwC, Mr. Ayo Akinduite. Thank you so much for your views and insights.
Thank you for having me.